Welcome back to day 4. Today we are going to just go through everything we've done over days 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to put everything together on a handy dandy study guide. So let's go ahead and take a look. So the first thing we're going to do is just review a radical. Now remember, a radical is when you have a number underneath a square root sign. We typically use radicals when the number underneath is not a perfect square and it's an irrational number. So in order to simplify those, we're always going to use our perfect squares. So let's go ahead and write down what those perfect squares are. So let's remember 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4, 16. 5 times 5, 6 times 6, 7 times 7, 8 times 8, 9 times 9, and 10 times 10. All right, so next up, we're going to go with what we learned on day 1, which was to simplify our radicals. So when we simplify, we are going to try to make the number underneath the radical smaller by using our perfect squares. Now the first thing you always want to just test out is 63 a perfect square? No, it is an irrational number. It goes on forever and it never repeats. So that means we can't just cross it out. So we're going to go ahead and try to simplify this. So we're going to keep the 2/3 where it is, and we're going to try to break this radical into 2 smaller radicals, but we want one of them to be a perfect square. So I'm going to go ahead and just test a couple different numbers here. So 63 divided by, let's try 49. Nope. 63 divided by 36. Nope. 63 divided by, well, I know 25 is not going to work, so let's try 16. Nope. 63 divided by 9. It works. So it would be 9 and 7. So this is going to be 7 and 9. Doesn't matter which order you put them in. Okay, now 2/3 is going to stay the same. Remember, everything is being multiplied times. Now, I cannot take the square root of 7. It's an irrational number, but the square root of 9 is 3. So this stays radical 7, but the square root of 9 crosses out, and we get a 3. And now we're going to multiply our whole numbers together. So I have our not whole numbers, but our real numbers out here. So 2/3 are rational numbers times 3. So 2 divided by 3 times 3, and we're going to get 2. So if I multiply these together, we then get 2 radical 7. And there's your final answer. Okay, as a reminder, you can always check this in the calculator. So let's try 2 divided by 3 times radical 63. We hit enter. And now let's type 2 radical 7. We hit enter. And we get the same number, so we know we did it correct. Okay, next up, we learned how to divide. So when you divide, you're going to divide, number 1, you're going to divide the coefficients first. Step 2, then you're going to divide the radicands. And then you're going to simplify at the end if you can. So simplify comes last. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a try. So 5 divided by 15. Okay, we're going to get a decimal, but that's okay. We're going to turn it back into a fraction, math frac. So we get 1/3. This is going to be 1/3. And then 96 divided by 2. Now you don't put the radicals in there, you just divide it normally. And we get 48. So this is going to be radical 48. Okay, now I'm going to take the square root of 48. It is not a perfect square. So we have to use one of these numbers over here to simplify that. So let's take a look. So 48 divided by 36. Nope. 48 divided by 25. Nope. 48 divided by 16. There we go. It's going to be 3. So this is going to break down into radical 16 times radical 3. And there is a 1/3 on the outside. Okay, so 16 is my perfect square, so that cancels and gives me 4. I have a 1/3, and remember, everything's being multiplied times radical 3. And a 1/3 times 4 is going to give me 4 over 3 radical 3. And with that, we have simplified. All right, so let's go ahead then and try our next one. So here we're going to multiply. So when you multiply, you're going to multiply the coefficients together. So 5 times 3 is 15. And then you're going to multiply the radicands together. So radical, and now 2 times 6 is 12. So you're going to multiply first, simplify last. So let's take a look. Radical 12, if I take the square root of 12 and I plug it in the calculator, it is not a perfect square, it's irrational. So let's see, can we find a perfect square in this list that goes into 12? We sure can, it's 4. So this is going to be 15 times radical 4 times radical 3. And the square root of 4 becomes a 2, because if I plug that in the calculator, the square root of 4, we get a whole number 2. The 15 stays the same. The radical 3 stays the same because the square root of 3, it's not perfect, it's irrational. And now we can multiply the coefficients. 15 times 2 is 30 radical 3. And we are done. All right, next up, let's take a look at powers. So remember, when you take a number inside a set of parentheses and you square it, that means you have to write it out with the number of times of the power. So this is actually going to be radical 11 times radical 11. So remember, when you multiply radicals, you're just going to multiply the radicands together. So 11 times 11 is 121, radical 121, but wait a second. You multiplied the same thing. Isn't that kind of like a square root? So let's go square root. We get just 11. So this whole thing cancels out, and it's equal to the whole number 11. All right, now number 2 is going to be a little bit different because you have a coefficient and a radicand. So we're going to multiply these together. 5 radical 3, 5 radical 3. So just like before, when you multiply the coefficients. So 5 times 5 is 25. And then you put the radical, and now radical 3 times radical 3, or 3 times 3 is 9, so we get radical 9. But 9 is on my list of perfect squares. And the square root of 9 is 3. So I can cross this off and replace it with a 3. So 25 times 3, we're going to get 75. And that's your final answer. Okay, next up is how to distribute. Remember, distribution is just multiplication from a monomial into a binomial. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this entire monomial on the outside, and we're going to multiply it to each of the inside terms. So really, this is going to be 5 radical 2, I'm going to put it in parentheses, times 3 radical 3, minus, and now I'm going to multiply it to the second term. So 5 radical 2 times 4. Okay, now that we've distributed the 5 radical 2, now we're going to multiply it to simplify. So 5 times 3 is 15. We put the radical symbol, and 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, and then we have minus, and now we're going to come over here. Now this 4 does not have a radical, so it's just a coefficient, so you multiply the coefficients. 5 times 4 is 20, and there's no radical, so radical 2 just stays the same. And these cannot be combined because this has a 6 and this one has a radical 2, and they're unlike terms. So that is your final answer. Okay, next up, in our last one for today, to add and subtract. Okay, the first step is to simplify, and then you can combine your like terms. So if I take a look, I have radical 18, radical 2, radical 98, and radical 36. So none of these can be combined because they're all different underneath the radicals. So let's go ahead and simplify. So 6 radical 18. So radical 18 is not a perfect square, but is there a number in here that goes into it? Yep, that would be 9. So this is going to be 6 radical 9, radical 2. Now the radical 9 actually becomes, the square root of 9 is 3. It's actually right here on the calculator still. So this becomes 6 times 3 times radical 2. And 6 times 3 is 18 radical 2. Now 5 radical 2. Can we simplify radical 2? Nope. So we're just going to drop this straight down. Okay, now let's see. Can we simplify radical 98? Well, we need to find a perfect square. So let's take a look. We always start with the biggest ones. So 98, let's take a look, divided by 81. Nope. 98 divided by 64. Nope. 98 divided by 49. Yes, it worked. Okay, so it's going to be 49 and 2. So this is going to become the square root of 49 times the square root of 2. And the square root of 49, you can always plug it in, is 7. So this crosses off and it becomes a whole number 7 radical 2. And we bring that down and we look, this operation is subtraction, 7 radical 2. Now if I take a look, my last one is 36. Now 36 is on my list of perfect squares, and the square root of 36 is 6. So I'm going to actually cancel that right out and put a 6 down here. Now we get to combine like terms, and you can only add or subtract them if they have the same radical. So 18 radical 2, 5 radical 2, 7 radical 2, we can combine those. So you combine them by adding or subtracting just the radicand. So 18 minus 5 minus 7, and we get 6. And the radicand stays the same, radical 2. And now this is a whole number, there's no radical there, so it just stays the same, minus 6. And that's your final answer. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow in class is going to be a day of practicing all of our different skills. So come ready with your study guide so that way you have an example to help you out with. Have a great night, everyone.